Hello, and welcome to Vision New England's Church in Action podcast. Here we talk with New England leaders about critical issues that impact how Christians engage in our culture to accelerate evangelism.
On behalf of Vision New England, I'd like to welcome you to the Church in Action podcast. I'm Brittany Feldott, Pastoral Associate at Cape Cod Church, and I'm here today with two very special guests, Stephanie Clark and Reverend Clyde Talley of Worcester. Part of Vision New England's mission is to tell the story of what God is doing across the region so that we can also be encouraged in our own work by hearing what he's doing in other churches and other ministries with other servants across New England. And there are so many stories that we could share, and we will through this podcast. And we wanted to start that this weekend by sharing two special spotlight ministries with you. So today I have our two guests, and the first of those is Stephanie. Stephanie Clark is the CEO of Amira New England, a nonprofit organization that provides aftercare services for adult female survivors of human trafficking across New England, including a home for those who have survived sexual exploitation. And they're also partnering with the Underground in Connecticut to open a second home there. Now, if you've ever heard Stephanie speak, you'll know that she's an incredible leader within that field. She also happens to be a published author and a national speaker. So it really is our honor to have her here this morning. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thanks so much for having me.
Great to have you here. And our second guest is Reverend Clyde Talley, who goes by Rev, but also answers to Pastor Talley. I hope I got that right, Pastor. And,
right.
Good. Pastor Talley is the senior pastor at Belmont AME Zion Church in Worcester. He is the treasurer for the United Way, incorporator for the Greater Worcester Community Foundation. He is the board member of Worcester Interfaith, and he's also the president and CEO of Yes We Care, which is an organization that provides a variety of services to help youth kind of walk into a brighter future. And his early career was spent in corporate life, but he's since spent 22 years in the ministry, including pastoring 5 churches. And now, along with being a pastor, Clyde is also a key leader within the African Methodist Episcopal Zion denomination. He's a professional speaker and president of the Worcester Black Clergy Alliance, which we'll get to hear a little bit about today. So welcome, Reverend. Good to have you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.
This is a real treat for me, being able to kind of be here today and chat with both of you. I'm a Massachusetts native, and just to hear a little bit about what's happening just in our own backyard here. But for some of those listening, they may not be as familiar with Massachusetts and Worcester. So Pastor, would you mind telling us a little bit about the community that you serve, some of the key demographics that affect your work in the city of Worcester?
Absolutely. For those that are not familiar with Worcester, we're the second largest city in Massachusetts. There's Boston and there's Worcester. We have about approximately 184,000 residents here in Worcester. This is a city where most of the immigrants that come to Massachusetts, they come to Worcester. It's about 68% white, 13% Black, and then the balance is the other races. The real estate is booming here in Worcester. We're a growing city. Those of you who have not been to Worcester in a while, when you come back, you're going to say, wow, there's a lot of new projects and a lot of new buildings and things going on in Worcester. And there's a lot of new development. We're now the home of the Paw Sox, the Red Sox minor league. Yay! Our church is located in Maine South. That's a low to moderate community, and that's where we're primarily serving. We serve all of Worcester, but that's our primary location.
Awesome. And Stephanie, so for some of those listening today who may not be familiar with Amira or the world that you kind of serve in, you serve a totally different kind of sphere and community, primarily serving women who are coming out of the commercial sex trade. So could you tell us a little bit, what are some of the driving forces behind your work that shape your ministry to women in New England?
Yeah, well, I think a huge part of why Amira exists is because Jesus loved unconditionally. That's the first thing. Our mission is driven by John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, than one lay down his life for his friends. And the issue of a woman, and this happens to men too. And so for anybody that's listening, it's not that I'm ignoring that boys and men are being, in the commercial sex trade. They absolutely are. We just work with women. So I just really tend to use that language more so. But the issue primarily is surrounding that definition of love. Most people, when they hear about trafficking and exploitation or things like this, they first just say, okay, well, this was just prostitution. And while prostitution is the act that's happening, you need to ask better questions on, is somebody actually choosing to do that? Or what was the circumstances surrounding that this became their choice? And a lot of it has to do with exploitation, with interruptions that happened in their life that led to vulnerabilities that were then preyed upon by somebody else. And so a lot of times people think this might be somebody that they didn't know, or it's just some really terrible person. And, obviously that is the case, but many, many times it is somebody that they knew. It could be a family member that's exploiting them. It might be somebody that they consider a fiance or an actual spouse, a boyfriend, something along those lines. And so that word love is used a lot, but then tied up with love comes with this cost. And that's not what love is it? Right? And so our driving force really is to help these women unpack that that's not what love is. Love comes with no cost at all. It's given to you freely because you are a human being. You are worth this. You have that dignity to be loved in that way.
Wow, that's really powerful. We're going to dive a little bit more into the work that you do through Amira. But just kind of before we get into that, some people may be wondering, the name Amira, where does that come from? I looked it up a little bit online, saw it has an Arabic root. What's the meaning behind that?
So it means princess, daughter of the king. In some Persian dialects, it means female warrior, which I find particularly awesome.
That is awesome.
Yeah. that's the root of it. How we came about with calling our organization Amira, our founding board, there was a wonderful man named Carlos, and his mother used to run a home down in Mexico, like a battered women's home, a domestic violence shelter, and that home was called the Amira House. Okay. And she had just retired when Amira was forming, and he said, well, what if we resurrect Amira? And that's how that happened.
Oh, that's so awesome.
I found it interesting, Stephanie, that you said that men are involved in the sex trade, because you always hear about the women. Yeah. This is my first time hearing about men involved in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Boys and men are all being trafficked too. The difference, and we have a wonderful friend in this work. His name is Steve Procopio, and he works with boys and men, primarily doing, counseling services and direct services for them. And he will tell you the difference is it takes often years and years after they've been exploited for them to admit that happened to them, because the shame is so much greater. So it's not like there's a sting operation happening and these boys or men are being found. It's that they're getting lost in the system and they end up years and years later saying, okay, well, that happened to me. He actually has a story where he was meeting with an older gentleman who I think was in his late 60s. And he admitted to Steve that he had been exploited, had been trafficked when he was 20 years old. And he had never told anybody that.
Wow.
So that was 40 years of his life that he never admitted to.
That's really important work. And that's part of the reason we're spotlighting it today. Yeah. And particularly right now, I think not only in our churches, but in our world, we're in a particularly challenging time. We're seeing a lot of darkness, but we also want to take some time today to celebrate good news and what God is doing in perhaps unexpected ways in the midst of those really challenging circumstances. And so we want to just talk a little bit about that today. What does that look like? And so Pastor Talley, I was hoping you could kind of start us off with what you're seeing in Worcester. I know we got to chat a little bit beforehand, and you mentioned a little bit some of the collaborative projects that you're seeing in the city, which is pretty incredible because we're living in a time right now where it seems like there's a lot of division, really stubborn division, not only nationally, but even within our own communities. So what kind of things are you seeing happen in Worcester right now around unity and collaboration?
Okay. Well, Worcester's on the move. So we got a lot of things going on right now. So we have one primary program called Worcester Together. It was initially created by the United Way and the Greater Worcester Community Foundation, and they've raised money. The focus was to help people during COVID because people were experiencing a lot of hardship, people losing jobs, struggling to keep up with the bills, trying to feed their families. So they came up with this Worcester Together Fund. And to date, we've distributed a little over $9 million back to the community. And that's to help people with their rent, their bills, getting food, clothing. Some of it has been distributed to agencies that are helping out families. And there's a team that meets on a regular basis with some of the key leaders in the community to talk about different issues surrounding COVID, but also the needs of the community. Wow. You know, are there any needs that still need to be addressed that we can give some attention to? And that's on a weekly basis. And that's headed up by Tim Garvin, who's the president of the United Way. But it's a collaboration of agencies, key leaders in the city coming together to figure out how can we meet the needs of the city. And we have a virtual job fair that's going to happen tomorrow, where people don't need to come to a physical location. They can do a job fair with hundreds of different companies and agencies. And Inc. provides a family resource every week for those that are struggling with issues in their families. We have our agency called Yes We Care, and we have been distributing food, clothing, housing essentials even before the start of COVID. We've recently partnered with Provision Ministries and the USDA for the Farmers to Families Food Box Program. And that's where we serve as a distribution site for everybody who's looking to supplement feeding their families. We provide wholesome food. We're distributing approximately 170 boxes a week for families that include 30-pound box. It includes fruit, dairy, meat, and some other things in that box. And we've hosted the Hope for Worcester program. That's an annual program that we have as a collaboration between the churches here in Worcester and some other agencies that look to support it. Yeah. And that's a community event where we go to a park and, you know, all these different tents are set up where people can get groceries, haircuts, family pictures, food, clothing, shoes, all kinds of stuff. And we distribute it out to the community as needed. And the reaction, you know, from the community is like, wow, all this is free. I can just get bags of groceries. It's really heartening when you hear people say that, you know, we were just wondering how we were going to get some food because we're out of money. But you guys are giving out groceries, bags of groceries. You know, this is a godsend. So we've hosted that, and we've distributed personal hygiene kits for the homeless, passed out masks and cleaning products for those who need it. And we've distributed snacks and food to agencies that are helping other families. Yeah. And to date, during this type of outreach, and remember, we started pre-COVID, we've helped out over 800 families just from Yes We Care. So we're busy. Worcester is busy. And there's a collaboration of other agencies doing a lot for the community. That's just a little highlight as to what's going on in Worcester.
Sure. Yeah, busy might be an understatement. That's a lot going on. That's incredible. So a lot of this was programs that you were putting on before COVID-19, but now you're seeing accelerate in a new way. Are you seeing things expanding? Is the need expanding for families locally?
Yeah, the need is expanding because we're finding that people are getting laid off from their jobs because jobs are either closing or they don't need as many employees. So when they used to have that financial income,
yep.
and now they're finding, well, okay, we don't have that income anymore.
Sure.
So I'm struggling putting food on the table. I'm struggling meeting the needs of my family because we don't have that income anymore. So yeah, there's a greater demand for these type services, especially during COVID, because people are finding themselves in a situation that they just weren't prepared for. They didn't, all of us, we didn't see this coming. When it started on the onset, we thought, well, okay, a couple of weeks, it'll be over, give it a month at the most.
Yeah,
but now we're into our, 8th or 9th month now, almost a year into this. So yeah, a lot of families are being impacted. They're being hit hard, that there's some needs out there, and we need to help them. We really do in any way possible. And that's how Worcester has come together, because one thing about Worcester is that while we're the second largest city in Massachusetts, we act as a small community. Because when there's a need in Worcester, people, they come together from all over Worcester and try to figure out, how can we help? What can we do? How can we assist?
Yeah.
And we make it happen.
So kind of a question on that. So people may be listening and be like, well, that's amazing, but we don't really have that kind of spirit in my city, my sphere of influence. Is that something that has always been true in Worcester, just kind of the character of your area? Or is that something that you've taken intentional steps to try and develop or participate in?
I think that's just the nature of Worcester.
Yeah.
I think it's intensified because of the greater need that's out there, where a lot more people are getting involved in ways that we can help. There's a lot of community agencies in Worcester, and even with the Black Clergy Alliance, as pastors, we come together and figure out, what can we do to help meet the needs of our congregations? Because, even though we're different churches coming together, they all have the same need, because we're servicing pretty much the same people from the same community. So we come together and figure out, how can we, as a collaborative effort, meet some of the needs of our congregation. So inherent within Worcester, I believe, from what I've experienced, and I've been here about 13 years, is that people in Worcester, they just have a nature to come together. Anytime that there's a need or something that needs to be done, or somebody is suffering, there's no problem with people coming together in Worcester. We get together and we make it happen.
That's a real gift. So we've got a question from somebody who's watching live online with us. And they wanted to ask, how is the emotional and mental health of Worcester right now? How's Worcester doing in terms of kind of mental health and families? And what can we do to help people on those levels?
In regard to the feedback that we're getting from the weekly meetings, people are stressed, because especially with the school situation, now parents are finding that they're homeschooling, and some never have done anything or didn't intend to ever do anything like that. But now they're kind of forced into it, where they have to do it. Because their child needs an education. And so, but it's stressful, because now they're dealing with distance learning and technology, and some have some struggles with technology. So it's very stressful for them. But also making sure that their kids learn what they need to learn and go through the lessons of what they need to go through, so that they're getting a proper education. You have some families where we're now somewhat isolated. They're now spending a lot more time together than they normally would. And so sometimes that in and of itself creates some stress.
Oh, sure.
Because, things that you could just, if it bothers you, you could just leave the house, go somewhere, do something. Now, that's not always an option. And even with our governor saying that, everyone needs to be in the house by 10 p.m. Okay, so that adds some limitation to our freedom, so to speak, as to just being free to go out and do whatever.
Right.
And so in regard to the health and mental well-being, we're dealing with stressful situations where people now, because of COVID, for the most part, find themselves in that they weren't prepared for. So they're now dealing with things that they never had to deal with before. And the other thing is that families that have somebody who's contracted the virus, you know, they're being challenged because they're now trying to figure out, well, how do I care for this person and make sure they're okay, and to make sure I don't get it.
Right.
And so with that in mind, you know, we have a lot of free testing sites that have been made available to the community. So even if you think that you might have it, you can go get yourself tested. And the ones that are being offered to the community are free. So they don't have to pay for that. And most of it's drive-through. So you don't even have to get out of the car.
Right.
And so we're providing that so that some people can have a peace of mind. You know, do I have it? Do I not have it? Well, what do I do? How do I get some help? And so we're providing those type of things that people can get some resources to help them, whatever situation they find themselves in. Also for U Inc, they specifically help families that are struggling, because sometimes you have some families with children with special needs.
Oh, yeah.
And so now they're having to do a lot more than they used to, because some of the resources that they had in the community, well, that agency's closed right now. So we don't have the same resources that we used to have access to. So now it's my responsibility to kind of fill in the gap.
Right.
And again, that's something that they weren't quite prepared for. And so there are some agencies that still provide those services. They have to somewhat modify how they do things, where they used to do things in person. Now they may have to do it virtually, but we've made those adjustments, and that's how we're servicing some of those needs.
Yeah, so it sounds like to me, in some ways, by helping with lots of those material and physical needs, by providing groceries, by providing these various services, you're kind of meeting the physical needs that are causing a lot of that stress or anxiety or worry, which has kind of an indirect effect on the mental health and wellness as well, right? So you're meeting kind of those physical needs that are causing a lot of that concern, a lot of that worry, which has an indirect kind of in the mental health sphere, which is really incredible. I've just got one more follow-up question. So it sounds like Worcester has kind of a collaborative spirit just woven into the fabric of your community already. What would you say are some of the hurdles to kind of that kind of collaboration, that kind of unity that could be there, but you've taken steps to kind of overcome? What kind of things do you have to overcome to work well with not only other churches, but also outside agencies beyond the church? What kinds of things have you seen that you have to kind of step beyond to work together? Anything in particular that comes to mind? And if not, that's okay.
Well, no, I haven't really seen any hurdles or things that we kind of need to make adjustments in order to move something through or to work together. I think the biggest hurdle is not being able to physically come together and have a conversation. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're accomplishing that through Zoom, you know, as a resource. So that in and of itself may have been a hurdle, where normally as a community, we physically come together, sit down at the table, have a conversation. And so now that we're prohibited from doing that, how else can we come together? Well, we've decided to use Zoom as a platform. Instead of that physical in-person meeting, we're now doing it virtually. And so that's probably the biggest hurdle. But you know what? We're working through it. We're still accomplishing a whole lot virtually.
Oh, yeah. I know the kind of list of things that you guys are doing in your community is incredible, and hopefully an encouragement to people who are trying to do similar things in their community, that oftentimes those partnerships can be really, really fruitful and lead to this kind of collaborative work, which is an incredible story happening in Worcester.
There is one thing, because you have first responders and people who are essential workers, where they got to go to work, but they got kids. Right. And so while they usually have like childcare services that are available, that they would just drop them off and then go to work. Well, that's been a hurdle that we've had to overcome. So we have some programs where we've modified childcare, but to still be in compliance with what the governor said. So that's been a challenge, is to provide those services with enough agencies, because one particular agency that used to have a whole lot of kids, well, they can't do that anymore.
Right.
So they need the collaboration of some other agencies to assist them to still provide that essential care for, again, for our first line responders and also for the essential workers, because they need this, because they need to keep a job. They need to be on the line. They need to do what they're able to do and not have to worry about their kids.
Right.
So that's been one big hurdle that we've had to deal with.
Sure, that's really good. I want to shift gears a little bit towards Stephanie, what you're doing, which we've all gotten to chat a little bit beforehand. And in many ways, you're also seeing some really incredible, inspiring things come out of a challenging time. Kind of similar to, Worcester seeing some incredible collaborative work, which is a great story in and of itself, to serve needs in a particularly challenging time. Amira is seeing some awesome things come out of this season. So Stephanie, you want to tell us a little bit about that? Kind of what are you seeing in the midst of an unusual year?
Yeah, well, I think this year has been the year for me of writing new policies that I would never have ever imagined having to write, right? So a policy on how do you quarantine and how do you, isolate and all that. And let's teach people to wash their hands. And so it's just all sorts of new things. That's been challenging in of itself. I've been practicing gratitude because that is something that this is a year that a lot of people are realizing, they have anxiety or there's a great amount of worry, and gratitude is a way to combat anxiety. And so I've been practicing gratitude throughout this pandemic. And early on, I think our second weekend, I was already pretty heightened, like our donations are going to dry up, we're going to have to close, just like going through that, okay, I have to fire people that I love and just freaking out about that, right? And then the second weekend, we had developed the policies about sickness. So if you were sick, then how long would you have to stay out? And if you had these symptoms, how long would you have to stay out? And I think in the span of 4 hours on a Sunday, 4 staff members had some sort of symptom, or their kid had a symptom. And so I was like, okay, I thought I was going to have to close because I might not have enough money, but I might have to close because I don't have enough bodies. Like, are you kidding me? And so that was just scary. But I think taking a step back in that moment and just like releasing all of that and giving it to God was a huge process for myself. And I'm grateful that I did, because here we are now and we're stronger than ever. We've seen more donations come in over the past, over this pandemic time than we've ever had before. And so now we're actually not just saying, okay, well, we can stay afloat and we can stay alive, but we can grow and we can expand and we can do things that we've never imagined doing before because of COVID. And so we're working on opening up a community resource center in Lynn. We've been partnering with a church called East Coast International Church. They have a space we're going to utilize to offer direct services that would support women who are in the commercial sex trade still, or maybe they already have housing, so they're not looking to come to a safe home program, but they still need clinical support. So we're going to have a clinician on staff in that space, as well as a survivor mentor who's going to be on staff in that space offering one-on-one mentoring. And so that was something that came about because of COVID. We would never have imagined, okay, let's do this. But now we're realizing, okay, this is the time for us to get into the community. Because the reality is, as much as the pandemic shut down so many things, the commercial sex trade did not shut down. And in fact, it got more and more dangerous because of so much of the world shutting down, and more violent. And so the response on our level needs to be exponentially more. We need to be doing more because the trauma is just exponentially larger at this point.
So just to give people kind of a point of reference, I want to share a couple of numbers so I saw on your website, just in 2019 alone, Amira reached 215 women through outreach groups, trained 307 health, social service, and law enforcement professionals to identify victims, and provided thousands of hours of recovery services to women and helped them experience 1,917 nights of freedom, which is an awesome number. And that was just in last year alone. So all of the things that you're talking about now, these kind of expansions, are on top of the work that you would traditionally do just in any given year.
Yeah. And this year we had to, this is, the year of pivots, right? So, teaching a highly traumatized woman how to do a Zoom conversation with their therapist since they can't physically go and be with them. And that actually, it's hard for us to be on Zoom all day long, but if you can think about it, cameras were used against these women in a variety of ways that is extremely traumatic. So to be, told, okay, you need to be on the web and on a camera, that actually can be a big hurdle. So our clinicians and clinical staff in the safe home have had to work with women surrounding just being okay with this and being comfortable with this and meeting them where they're at in that space. Another big thing is, all of the supports out in the community were shut down. So NA meetings and sobriety meetings and intensive outpatient treatment, all that's shut down. So what can we now do in-house? And so asking staff to kind of step up in new ways and create new ways to be that support has been huge. I think it's been a year of pivot, but a year of incredible creativity. And I'm so grateful for the staff at Amira. I apologize, my dog is pushing against me.
It's all right. We're all Zooming.
This is life of Zoom, right? It's been a great year of creativity, and I'm just so grateful for the staff being willing to do that.
Well, that's awesome. We're seeing that in a lot of spheres, that the pressure and the new challenges are kind of prompting us to be creative, and that creativity comes from God, who is the ultimate creator, right? And is at work, and often in ways that we can't see or wouldn't imagine. And so interesting to hear about kind of how you've pivoted and new opportunities. I'm curious just in terms of Zoom. So, that's been challenging because of what you mentioned and trying to pivot and be online all day. Have you seen any opportunities where that's actually given you increased access, with people being more willing to join you online or anything like that?
Yeah, so we, like all nonprofits, our annual gala, whatever fundraiser, gone, right? Ours was supposed to be in April, so most definitely gone. Right. And so we did an online event on October 1st, and we set a goal. And this was a woman on staff. Her name is Mary. In her time with God, like, she was trying to figure out, she's in charge of our development and fundraising, and she was trying to figure it out. And God really just pressed on her, like, it's going to be $100,000. And this was a big number, obviously. Yeah. And yeah, it's a scary thing. And so she said it one time in a meeting, with our development team and myself. And I said, okay. And we put that down in stone. And then within a week, we were getting a phone call from a person in the community in Connecticut who had heard a sermon online by somebody that's an Amira staff member that was preaching at a church online, and was planning to give a gift of $50,000 to an organization that does this work overseas, but realized, okay, this happens in Connecticut and you guys are trying to open a home in Connecticut. And so this $50,000 needs to go to you. Wow. And so now we were able to say, okay, well, we have a matching gift of 50 grand for this 100 grand thing. And boom. And so we raised over 100 grand with this virtual fundraiser. And we were able to do things on that day. We did a full day of videos on, from what it's like from exploitation all the way to liberation. And we were able to bring in experts that we wouldn't normally be able to bring in to a specific event. We were able to talk about things at a longer amount of time because we knew people could sit down and watch a 20-minute video if they wanted to that day or the next day or whatever. We were able to really go in depth, where if we had an hour-long, thing where we're all dressed up eating lamb and chicken, that's not going to happen, right?
Right.
So that was one of the largest blessings I find. And I'm like, I really hope this continues. Like, I know, like, it's going to be great to get back together in person, but there was something beneficial to that and really awesome about that.
Yeah.
And so I'm grateful for that. And those videos are still up on our website. So if anybody's like, oh my goodness, I want to see those things. Yeah, they're awesome and amazing. And really, really good to kind of get you to understand this work a little bit more.
Yeah. For anybody that wanted to check those out, Stephanie, what is your website, just for anybody listening?
Yeah, it's amirainc.org. So AMIRAHINC.org.
Awesome. Yeah, we were listening to a Pastor Gordon McDonald speak yesterday a little bit about how Zoom is, there's so many unexpected things that we are getting from Zoom. And we as the church need to figure out at this point, what are its advantages? What are the ways this is going to change ministry for the next 100, 200, 300 years? Martin Luther had to figure that out for the printing press, he said, and it's our job to figure out now what that means for Zoom. And maybe we'll all be attending banquets online if it's a little bit easier for us, or maybe that'll be an option. It's really incredible. Stephanie, I just have one follow-up question. So you kind of mentioned how this organization in Connecticut realized, so we've been funding things overseas, but this is happening, just next door without us really paying attention to that. A lot of people listening may not be aware of how the sex trafficking industry is local or how it operates in New England. Can you speak a little bit just to what that looks like in our region for anybody who doesn't really have a concept of how that's close to home?
Sure. Yeah. And so the reality is that it's everywhere. So we're always first busting the first myth, like, okay, so yes, this happens overseas, absolutely. But the reality is it's here. Yeah. And it's not just in, this, urban area and, that's, yes, happens there, happens in the suburbs, happens in rural communities, happens everywhere. And the reality is too, especially with COVID, anywhere that there's the internet, this is happening. I think we have to start to really begin to redefine things. And I think the whole Me Too, Church Too movement has begun that conversation a little bit. And I'm ready for it to go to the next level. So exploitation is a lot larger than what people think it is. And we have to stop thinking that these people are choosing these things. All the women that are in the porn industry, are they choosing to do that? That's a form of exploitation. And especially a lot of the porn sites, it's trafficking, and it's pretty intense and terrible. So I think we did a lot of stuff early on in COVID surrounding, like, how do you help your kids? Because all of our kids are online now all day long with school, and so safety around that. Just trying to educate the community, like, you need to be aware of these things and ways people that want to exploit your children could start to do that just by the video camera that's on their screen. And so this stuff happens, absolutely. I think the reality though is that we really need to start to have conversations, much larger conversations about systems of racism, systems of poverty, systems of vulnerabilities, because these are the things that bring about a whole community that is just being preyed upon again and again and again by those that would exploit it. And so we need to have huge conversations on those things, and then action plans on how do we break down these dividing walls? How do we actually treat addiction as a mental health disease rather than continuing to throw people into jail, which then put them into a pipeline to be exploited? Like, there's a whole breakdown that we have. And so again, I'm grateful for this time because I feel like people are having more conversations than we've ever had before. I'm ready for really great legislation. That's what I'm ready for. So we'll see if we get there. But that's what I'm ready for, is people to take these awesome conversations to the next step, to actually help us to do something really practical to combat these things.
Yeah, and as you said, when you become more aware of all of the factors that are driving this issue, not only builds in us a little bit of empathy, but also practical awareness of, okay, here's how we address this. And so that is an awesome story that that awareness is kind of building during this time. And Amira's had new opportunities to meet people where they're at, not only the women that you serve, but also just educating people in general. So that's a great story. We're kind of nearing the end of our time, but we've got some time left, and I thought it would be really valuable to spend just a little bit of time getting some advice from the both of you and some encouragement to those who might be serving in this time, which is a little bit of a difficult time to navigate. And many of us may be in situations where we don't see the good stories that are happening within our ministry. We see a lot of struggle or darkness or failure. Many people are in that position and aren't able to see as distinctly, okay, here's how God is working. Here's the good news that's coming out of this time. So for people who are in that, I'd love for you to give us a little bit of perspective and encouragement. Pastor Talley, maybe you could start us off. What kind of advice or encouragement would you give to leaders during this time?
Okay, well, I'm glad you asked. There's an article that I had read about 10 things that get pastors into trouble by Ron Edmondson. And I thought it was very insightful. And I'd like to share, some of what I got out of it. The first thing that he talks about is talking about, don't neglect your own soul. I mean, as caretakers, we want to help everybody, but don't neglect yourself. Sometimes you got to put yourself first. Get the proper rest that you need to get. Spend time with your family where you need to spend time, because your family's a priority over the ministry. I'm not sure how many would agree with that, but biblically, your family is your priority, because even the Bible says that if you can't take care of your family, how are you going to take care of the church? So, number one, don't neglect your own soul. Get proper rest, get help when you need help. Find somebody to talk to when you need to talk to somebody, because I've heard some recent accounts where pastors have committed suicide, got into drugs because they're stressed out and they feel they don't have an outlet. They need some help. And also, don't get caught up in the numbers game, because, when you look at the numbers saying, wow, we go virtual, we're going to lose people and we're not going to have enough. And remember, God is responsible for the numbers, not you. You do the ministry. Allow God to add the numbers. And when you look at other ministries, there will always be a bigger ministry. Somebody's going to give a better tweet, write a better book, do a better blog, preach a better sermon. But, if you get caught up in that comparison trap, it's going to distract you from doing what you're supposed to do, because you're trying to measure up with someone else. And their ministry is not your ministry. It's two different ministries.
And there are different markers too, right? Different numbers that we pay attention to. Attendance may not be as well, it may be equally as valuable as the number of groceries that you give out or the number of families that you serve during this time. The markers might look different.
Exactly. Don't get hooked up in the number of likes and how many times that your video was viewed, and and how much active participation you have, how many comments did I get. Don't get caught up in that. That's just a distraction. And the other thing is be careful not to get distracted by people who complain, because, when you think about it, somebody is not going to always be happy with whatever decision you make. But if you get bent on pleasing other people than pleasing God, you're going to have a hard time trying to find some peace for yourself. And so understand, part of the responsibility of being a leader is not trying to make everybody happy. Sometimes you're going to make unpopular decisions for some people, but it's the right thing to do. And at the end of the day, you want to make sure that you're doing the right thing.
Yeah.
And the other thing is it's easy to preach the easy stuff. That's easy. Sometimes people need to hear some messages that will get them to reevaluate their choices and things that they are doing, even when it's unpopular. But you got to do it with truth and grace, but it's something that people need to hear, not just these happy stories that you just want to share. Sometimes people says, well, I'm in a bad place and I don't know what to do. Okay, well, you need to speak to that. And the other thing is don't neglect friendships, because everybody needs somebody they can talk to. So if you have somebody that you can confide in and you can trust that it's not going to go any further than that person, then take advantage of that. That's your outlet. That's somebody that you can talk to get some help, because at some point in time, everybody's going to need some help. The other thing is to be clear that you're never going to go back to normal. Some pastors, especially with the building being closed, they said, well, as soon as I get back in there, things will go back to the way it used to be. Things will never be the way they used to be. So the sooner you accept that and embrace it, the better you are to move forward, because change is inevitable. Either you move with change or change will move you. At the end of the day, that's what it amounts to. So you'll never go back to normal, even when your church is open. Because things that we used to do, and hopefully during this COVID time period, it'll help you reevaluate everything you've been doing. And you may have found that some of the meetings that you thought you needed to have the people there, you can't do it, but you're getting it done.
Yeah.
So you need to be creative. Think outside the box. Be creative in looking at new ways to do things. See what somebody else is doing that seems to work for them, that may work for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I think somebody said it's an opportunity to stop things that we didn't need to be doing, and an opportunity to start new things that maybe we should have been doing. And it's a good reminder, especially as we kind of head into these darker winter months, potentially with increases in quarantine and stuff like that. Good reminder, particularly on the friendship front, that is so valuable, and it's really easy for it to slip away, and probably more valuable even as we move into the winter months in quarantine. So that's really good. Thank you so much, Pastor. Stephanie, on your end, I'd imagine that your work is emotionally challenging, just the sphere that you serve in. And probably very few of us listening can relate to that precisely. But whenever we serve people, that comes with an emotional responsibility and burden. Wondering during this time in particular, what are some of the things that you are learning in terms of looking out for yourself to try and kind of accommodate that emotional challenge that comes with the work that we do?
Well, I mean, the conversation is always boundaries, right? So, picking up Boundaries by Townsend is the Bible, right? And learning to implement those things, because saying no is the right thing. And saying no helps everybody, yourself and the other person on the line that's wanting so much, right? And I know, the work that we do, we experience evil at a level that it's pretty incredible. But the reality is, pastors and ministers and parachurch leaders and nonprofit leaders, you are all burden bearers, and God calls us to bear one another's burdens, but He doesn't call us to burn ourselves out. And so we actually, at Amira, we have a policy. I wrote a policy on rest and Sabbath, just quite because I realized, as much as I told my staff, no, you don't need to work that much, they still worked that much. And so I had to write it out for them. You are a full-time employee, which means 40 hours a week is what is being asked of you. If you go to 50 once in a while, okay. If you do any more, your boss is going to have a very big problem. And wrote that out in black and white for them. And I did that partially because I'm a former pastor myself. So, the reality is every pastor averages 60 plus hours a week of work, and none of that's healthy. And so I did that in response to coming out of that and detoxing myself from that and saying, if we're going to do this work where we are bearing the burden of trauma, then we need to take care of ourselves, and we need to do that in a radical way. And so even this year, because Pastor Talley, I love that you said, we need to rethink things. This is the time that we get to rethink things. So we give paid time off to employees, but do they take it? And so I've implemented, I had a talk with the staff, and I said, so we give a pretty large amount of paid time off because of the work that we do. But nobody's taking it. So every quarter, all full-time staff members will take 1 full week of vacation. Boom. Every trimester, every part-time staff member will take 1 full week of vacation. We will plan these things out so we're not all taking the same week. We will, do this properly. If for some reason you're getting married and you want 2 weeks, okay, great. You have 2 weeks of that quarter. It doesn't mean you take from the the next quarter, the previous quarter. You get extra. This is the whole we need to build in rest, work, rest, work, rest, work. because otherwise we will work. And by the time we need the rest, then when we're resting, we are exhausted.
Yeah.
Rather than just, having a good week of rest where we get to do some fun things or read a book excitedly rather than sleeping the whole week.
Right. Just
so
to get back to normal. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're radical on that. And I'm happy to talk to any leader out there about this stuff, because I know it's scary to be like, is this actually going to work? Mm. I hope so. And I think so. That's what we're trying to reinvent what this looks like at Amira. And I'd love to share that with anybody who needs it. I think the other thing, Pastor Talley, you said, like nothing's going to go back to normal. I love that. I think I've been a Christian now for over 20 years. And I often think about like those first 2 years that I was a Christian and the things that I did and the faith that I had and how on fire I was. And I'm like, it's never going to be that ever again, because I've lived 20 years now. And one of the largest tragedies I've had in my life was, my mom passed away when she was 53 years old. And that was, 9 years ago now. So it was unexpected, hit out of the blue, and I miscarried at the same time. So it was a lot of tragedy in my life that I went through, and my faith went through something pretty rock hard. And I remember being on the other side of that tragedy and looking back to what my faith had been and realizing it will never be that. It will never be that again, because I have this now. And what it will become is up to me. Like, it can become stagnant, and it can become, just this thing that I do, or it can become something much deeper because of this. And I think that that's the moment that we're in. Like, as leaders, like, we will never get back to what we were doing, but God has us here because we could have something way deeper, way better, way more in the line of what his great, amazing will is. And that's what I'm excited for. Like, Amen. We don't know what it's going to be, but my goodness, my God knows.
Yeah.
It's a really great reminder, because it's so easy to grieve what you've lost, to get stuck in to just be upset about what you've lost. And rather than think, okay, it's never going to be that. Let's look ahead to what it can be, because it doesn't mean that the next season won't be equally beautiful in different ways, equally successful in God's eyes in different ways. So yeah, it's a really good reminder. And I love what you had to say, Stephanie, about rest and the practical things that Amira is doing to force that kind of rest.
Yeah,
I'm sure
force you to take your time off. Yeah,
because it's true. It's one of those topics that I think all of us listening, we know intellectually how important that is, and we say that it's important, and we say, "Oh, I should do that." And then oftentimes we don't. And it's worth stopping and thinking about as leaders, okay, do we value it? And if so, what does that mean? And how do we incorporate that? So really interesting. And if anybody wants to reach out about what Amira is doing, absolutely reach out to Stephanie. Well, we're about at the end of our time, and I just want to thank you, both Stephanie and Pastor Talley, for sharing the good stories of what God is doing in Worcester and across New England, and just for giving us a little bit of insight and advice as leaders during this time, which we can all glean from. I was talking with a pastor friend yesterday who mentioned, it's like 30 years ago, pastors across New England had no idea. Ministry leaders, servants had no idea what each other were doing. People would often not even talk to the pastor down the street about what he or she was doing. So we're seeing that change. We want to be part of that. And stories like this are really encouraging and equip us to do each of our individual work better. So thank you so much for being here with us this morning.
Thank you.
We're grateful for your ministry and kind of celebrating what God is doing through you. I'd also like to thank our producer, Bob Atherton, and you, anybody listening, our audience, for joining us. We hope it was an encouragement to you, and if you found the podcast helpful, we hope you'll also consider subscribing on any of our platforms, Spotify, Apple Music, Google Podcasts, and Amazon Music, and sharing it with a friend who might benefit from it. If you subscribe, it'll give you updates whenever we drop a new episode, which will let you know when you can get the next Spotlight story. Our next episode will air live on Facebook on Thursday, December 3rd at 10 a.m. And we'll be talking with Dr. Karen Mason, who is the professor of counseling and psychology at Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary. 2020 has been a traumatic year for many people. In fact, we were recently reading statistics from the CDC noting that 1 in 4 young adults has contemplated suicide during this pandemic. And new research from Harvard University suggests that nearly half are showing signs of depression, which is a staggering number. So this conversation with Dr. Karen Mason could not be a more timely conversation for leaders who are charged with caring for people as we kind of head into this winter season. So Karen will be talking with us about how to understand trauma and the impact it can have on people, as well as how our faith and in Christ can help us find a path through traumatic stress. So we hope you'll join us for that again on Thursday, December 3rd at 10 a.m. Thanks for joining us today, everybody, and we hope to see you then.